It was another scorching afternoon in Jackson, Mississippi. The sun hung heavy in the sky, its blistering rays beating down relentlessly on the cracked asphalt of Woodrow Wilson Avenue. The street shimmered with the heat, and the air felt thick, suffocating. For Officer Thomas Caldwell, it was another routine shift, a sip of lukewarm convenience store coffee, the faint hum of his patrol car's air conditioning, and the monotony of the job. The steady cadence of tires rolling over asphalt, the occasional honk of a horn, and the idle chatter of pedestrians in the distance, all of it blending into the background noise of his thoughts. He was half watching the road, half waiting for the weekend to arrive, but something in the air that afternoon felt different. If you're tuning in from Jackson, Mississippi, or watching from somewhere else in the U.S., let us know in the comments. What time is it in your neck of the woods? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what's coming up. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. It all started with a black 2014 Cadillac CTS, an unassuming vehicle rolling through the intersection. The yellow light flickered a split second from turning red. And there it was. Caldwell's instinct kicked in his fingers, moving automatically, flipping on the sirens. The sharp whoop of the siren sliced through the air, cutting through the stillness of the afternoon. He watched as the Cadillac smoothly pulled over to the side of the road, its driver showing no hesitation, no sudden swerving. He'd seen this 1,000 times before, but something about the way this driver responded felt different. It wasn't the speed or the way the car had run the light, though that was enough to warrant a stop. It was the calm. The driver didn't flinch when the sirens blared behind him. Instead, he pulled over effortlessly without the slightest hint of panic. Caldwell was used to seeing drivers squirm, nervous eyes darting around, hands trembling as they searched for their paperwork. But not this man. There was something in his demeanor that Caldwell couldn't quite place, something unnerving. Something that made his grip on the steering wheel tighten just a little more. As he stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt and preparing for another routine encounter, he couldn't shake the feeling that this stop would be different. It was as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. He approached the driver's side, his boots tapping softly against the hot pavement. The driver, an older black man, looked up from behind his tinted windows, meeting Caldwell's eyes with a steady, calm gaze. There was no sign of fear, no discomfort, no hastily shuffled papers. Just calm. His posture was rigid yet relaxed, as though he had been through this many times before. Caldwell didn't like it. License and registration. He barked, his voice firm, trying to maintain control. He wasn't sure why, but something in the way the man held himself made Caldwell feel a flicker of doubt. The man, still calm, didn't immediately reach for his documents. Instead, he met Caldwell's gaze directly, and in that moment, something shifted. A chill crept up Caldwell's spine. His fingers tightened on his belt. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" "Officer!" The man's voice wasn't confrontational. In fact, it was calm, almost polite, but it struck a nerve. Caldwell's patience was already thinning, and that tone so measured, so composed, only fueled his frustration. He hated when people didn't just comply. "You ran a red light." He snapped, his voice hardening. The man raised an eyebrow, glanced briefly at the intersection in his rearview mirror, and then turned back to Caldwell. "That light was yellow when I crossed it. I'm sure of it," he replied, his tone still even. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He had no dash-cam footage to back up his claim, but that didn't matter to him. His word was law. Caldwell wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone who wasn't visibly scared. His pride flared up, pushing him further into a corner. He repeated his demand, this time more forcefully. License and registration. The man didn't hesitate this time. He slowly reached into the glove compartment, pulled out his ID, and handed it over. Caldwell scanned the name, Dr. Charles Washington. It didn't ring a bell. But something about the way Washington handed over the documents. No fumbling, no unnecessary movement made Caldwell's skin prickle. It was too deliberate, too controlled. This wasn't just another driver trying to get out of trouble. This was someone who had been in situations like this before. Step out of the car. Caldwell ordered his patience at its breaking point. Washington frowned slightly but didn't argue. Instead, he met Caldwell's gaze one last time before slowly opening the door. He moved with purpose, unfolding his body from the car with a grace that betrayed his age. As though this wasn't his first time dealing with authority, Caldwell didn't like that either. He gestured to the back of the car, his hand now hovering over his cuffs ready for whatever might come next. The air between them grew heavy, and Caldwell couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he had just pulled over someone who was far more than he appeared. As Washington stood against the trunk of his car, hands resting just below his shoulders, Caldwell patted him down. But just as he did, he heard Washington mutter something under his breath. "This is unnecessary." Caldwell's grip on his cuffs tightened, his frustration mounting. He clenched his jaw and forced out, "Excuse me. You have my ID, you ran my plates. You know I'm clean." Washington continued, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. Caldwell didn't respond. He finished the search and took a step back, but before he could speak, he did something that would change everything. He reached for his cuffs. This is just the beginning of a story that would unravel the layers of power, privilege, and accountability. A routine traffic stop quickly becomes an explosive confrontation that no one could have predicted. Are you ready for what happens next? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from. You don't want to miss the shocking turn of events coming up. Trust me, you'll be on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned. The real story is just beginning. As Caldwell reached for his cuffs, the air between him and Dr. Charles Washington shifted like the calm before a storm. Washington, still eerily calm, turned his body slightly, his eyes narrowing as he met Caldwell's gaze, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet resolve. For the first time in a long while, Caldwell felt a knot tighten in his stomach, something he wasn't used to. The man in front of him wasn't the nervous, compliant suspect he was used to. Washington was different, and that difference made Caldwell uneasy. "You don't want to do this," Washington said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that Caldwell couldn't ignore. He was an older black man, but his tone was sharp, unwavering. "I'm not resisting, officer, but I am questioning your authority." For a moment, Caldwell froze. His hand hovered over the cuffs, his mind racing. Washington wasn't backing down, but he also wasn't moving toward violence either. He was speaking reasoning, trying to defuse the situation. The calmness in his voice only made Caldwell more agitated. How dare this man question him? He was the one with the badge. He was the one who had the power to arrest. But then again, Washington wasn't just any man. He was more than just a civilian. He had a history, a background that could make anyone in law enforcement take a second look. "You're refusing to comply." "That's resisting," Caldwell spat out, trying to keep control, but his voice wavered. The words felt hollow as soon as they left his mouth. He knew deep down that he wasn't in the right here, but pride and authority pushed him forward. Washington's eyes, though, never left his. The older man sighed almost imperceptibly, as if he had been down this road before, dealing with men like Caldwell. "I'm not resisting. I'm questioning an unlawful detainment," he said again, this time with a level of patience that seemed to eat away at Caldwell's certainty. And then, before Caldwell could respond, something unexpected happened. Washington did not recoil in fear or act out in anger. Instead, he turned slowly, deliberately, placing his hands on the trunk of the car as if he had resigned himself to something inevitable. It was a controlled movement, one that told Caldwell everything he needed to know. Washington had been here before in situations like this with officers like him. And for the first time, Caldwell realized that maybe, just maybe, Washington wasn't the one who needed to be scared. It was him. The shift in the air was palpable, and Caldwell felt the weight of the moment press down on him. But instead of backing off, he leaned in, his frustration building. "Turn around," he ordered, his voice now tinged with something that felt more like desperation than authority. But Washington did not budge. "No," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. It was a single word, simple and quiet, but it had the effect of a thunderclap in Caldwell's ears. Something snapped inside Caldwell. Without thinking, without consideration, he grabbed Washington's arm and spun him around, ready to snap the cuffs on him. The air seemed to crackle with tension, but just as Caldwell thought he had the situation in control, Washington reacted. In an instant, he twisted his body effortlessly, breaking free of Caldwell's hold. The movement was fluid, calculated, a stark contrast to Caldwell's clumsy, frustrated grasp. For the first time, Caldwell realized that the man he was dealing with wasn't just another suspect. Washington wasn't just a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, he was someone with a quiet strength that cut through Caldwell's bravado. He was someone who knew exactly how to handle himself no matter the situation. The realization hit Caldwell like a slap to the face, but it was too late. His pride, his anger had already taken over. He moved faster, more aggressively this time, shoving Washington against the trunk of the Cadillac. Washington let out a grunt but made no attempt to resist. The struggle wasn't physical. It was ideological, psychological. The fight was over. Power, control. Respect. With a grunt, Caldwell pushed Washington harder, slamming his forearm into his back, forcing his arms behind his body as the metal of the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The sound of the cuffs echoed through the silence of the street. It was final. The decision had been made. "You're under arrest," Caldwell said, his voice harsh, almost triumphantly. For what Washington asked, his voice still calm, still composed. The question hung in the air, and Caldwell hesitated. He didn't have an answer. He had no justification for what he had just done, and for the first time it struck him like a cold wave of realization. He had no reason to arrest this man. No evidence, no crime. But Caldwell wasn't about to back down. "Obstruction," he muttered almost to himself, his voice faltering, interfering with an officer's investigation. Washington shook his head slowly, disappointment replacing the anger that had been simmering in Caldwell. "You're making a mistake, officer," he said, his tone almost resigned. "And it's one you're going to regret." Caldwell tried to laugh, but it came out as a hollow sound. Washington's words dug under his skin in a way he couldn't explain. His hand reached for his radio, his fingers shaking as he called in the arrest, but Washington didn't react the way most suspects did. He didn't beg, didn't protest, he just sat there quietly letting Caldwell do his worst. If you're feeling the tension in this moment, just wait. Things are about to take a turn. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. Is there something you're expecting to happen next? Or maybe you already know it's coming. This is only the beginning of a story that will challenge everything Caldwell thought he knew about power authority and what happens when it all goes wrong. Stick with us, because the real twist is coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. The ride to the station was anything but smooth. Caldwell sat in the front of his patrol car, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel, trying to steady his breath. Washington sat silently in the back seat, his posture still perfect, still controlled. But Caldwell could feel the tension in the air between them, thick as a fog. Every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw Washington's eyes calm, calculating, staring right back at him. It was as if he could see through Caldwell's soul, and it made the officer uncomfortable in a way he couldn't explain. There was something different about this man, something that unsettled Caldwell more than he cared to admit. Most suspects, most people he had dealt with in his career were either scared or angry. They'd beg, shout, or try to run at Washington. He didn't react the way people were supposed to react. His refusal to be intimidated felt like a challenge, and Caldwell didn't like feeling challenged. As the car rolled into the station parking lot, Caldwell couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another routine arrest. He had made a mistake, a big one, and as much as he hated to admit it, he could feel the weight of it already starting to press down on him. The moment they entered the station, it was clear things were about to spiral out of control. The air felt thick with tension, like everyone in the building knew something was wrong. Phones rang incessantly, and officers whispered in tight circles, their eyes darting toward Caldwell as he led Washington to the holding cell. It wasn't long before his Sergeant William "Bill" Montgomery summoned him to his office. Caldwell, Montgomery's voice was like a slap in the face, sharp and cutting through the noise. Caldwell immediately stiffened his stomach, churning as he walked toward his sergeant's office. Montgomery was already standing by his desk, his phone in hand, his expression thunderous. As Caldwell walked in, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. "You mind telling me," Montgomery growled, "why the hell I have a U.S. Army colonel sitting in our holding cell?" Caldwell blinked in confusion. What?" Colonel." Montgomery slammed the phone down on his desk. "Colonel Charles Washington. 30 years of military service. 2 tours overseas. Pentagon clearance and a direct line to the damn Secretary of Defense." The blood drained from Caldwell's face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He hadn't checked Washington's ID properly. He hadn't even thought to run a background check. He just saw an older black man challenging his authority, and his ego took over. He didn't care who Washington was, not until it was too late. "You realize what you've done?" Montgomery's voice was low, dangerous. He jabbed a finger toward the window, gesturing to the chaos outside. Caldwell's gaze shifted to the front desk, where a group of men in suits stood stone-faced. Federal agents. And now he realized it was too late to undo the damage. He didn't know who Washington was, but the entire station did now. This wasn't just some routine traffic stop anymore. This was going to make waves. Big waves. Montgomery continued, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You put cuffs on a man who has more clearance and authority than you will ever have." And now, he added, gesturing toward the window again, "there's a damn federal investigation underway. People are already asking why a decorated colonel was thrown in a holding cell like a common criminal." Caldwell felt his pulse hammering in his skull. "But he wasn't cooperating." He protested weakly, his voice cracking. Montgomery just shook his head, his face still stone cold. "No, Caldwell," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. "You didn't like that he questioned you. You didn't like that he knew his rights. You didn't like being challenged by a black man who wasn't afraid to stand up to you." Caldwell froze. His mind raced. He didn't want to admit it, but there it was, plain as day. Washington hadn't been afraid of him, and Caldwell had hated it. The racist undertones were too real, too close to the surface, even if he didn't fully acknowledge it at the time. It wasn't just the man's race, it was the fact that he had dared to question Caldwell's authority to stand tall and unafraid. Caldwell wasn't used to that. He was used to control. "Now," Montgomery said, snapping Caldwell back to the present, "you've got an internal review on your hands. We're pulling your entire record, every single stop you've made. Do you know how many people are going to be looking at you now?" Caldwell opened his mouth, but no words came out. His stomach twisted, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Montgomery wasn't finished. "We're putting you on paid leave. You're going to sit tight while the department figures this out." Montgomery slapped a folder onto Caldwell's chest. "This is your record for the past year. I want you to take a good look at it." Caldwell glanced down at the folder, and his heart sank. It was a thick stack of documents, reports, and records. He had known he had made some questionable stops, but the extent of it hit him like a ton of bricks. "Caldwell," Montgomery continued, "you need to understand something. We don't just treat people this way. You want to tell me why? 80% of your stops were black men. And in the past year you've given citations to about 15% of them. The rest you let go, and don't try to tell me it's just coincidence. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It wasn't just an isolated incident. Caldwell had been acting on something deeper. Something ingrained in him without fully realizing it. He had been treating people differently, even when they hadn't given him a reason to. The silence in the room was deafening. Caldwell wanted to argue, to deny it all, but he couldn't, because deep down he knew Montgomery was right. He had been operating in a system that didn't question him. But now that system was coming for him. Caldwell's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden buzz of his phone. His heart stopped when he saw the email notification. It was from Internal Affairs Mandatory Review, Unpaid Leave. He felt the floor beneath him shift, and for the first time in his career, Caldwell realized how expendable he was. How easily he could be cast aside. His badge, once his shield, was now just a reminder of everything he had failed to protect. If you're still with us, make sure to hit that subscribe button because things are about to take an even darker turn. Caldwell might be facing the music now. But the real fallout is just getting started. Don't miss out. This story is just beginning. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings that went nowhere. Caldwell sat at his kitchen table late one evening staring blankly at the pile of papers in front of him. The department had placed him on unpaid leave, a punishment that stung more than he cared to admit. His thoughts raced, but they always returned to one thing: Washington. The old man, so calm, so unshaken, had turned his life upside down in a matter of hours. What had started as a simple traffic stop now felt like the unraveling of everything Caldwell had ever known. His phone buzzed on the table, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts. It was an email from Internal Affairs. His heart skipped a beat as he opened it. The subject line was blunt: Mandatory Investigation. Inside the email outlined the official review of all his past arrests and traffic stops. Caldwell's stomach churned as he scanned through the details. His entire career was under scrutiny. It wasn't just about Washington anymore. Internal Affairs had begun digging into his record. Every traffic stop, every arrest, every decision he had ever made was now in question. He rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. But then the words Washington spoke to him that day echoed in his mind. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Caldwell's hand clenched into a fist. How had he not known? Why hadn't he taken the time to check? If he had, maybe this wouldn't have spiraled out of control, but it was too late now. Days later, Caldwell was summoned to a meeting with his union rep. The small office was stuffy, the air thick with tension. Caldwell's union rep, Laura Fields, a sharp-minded black woman in her late 40s, sat across from him, her face unreadable. Fields had always been an ally in the past, helping officers navigate tough situations, but today there was no comfort in her presence. There was no familiar reassurance. Caldwell. "This isn't just a one-off." Fields began, her voice measured but firm. "This is a pattern, and it's not going to be easy to explain away." Caldwell let out a deep sigh. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I just thought he was—" He stopped himself before he could say the words. What was he going to say? That he thought Washington was just another man trying to challenge his authority, that he was too caught up in his own power to see the situation clearly. "Caldwell, we both know what this looks like. You've had an unusually high number of stops involving black men, and you've never been called out on it before, but Washington, a highly decorated officer, questions you, and now you're facing an internal investigation. Do you see the pattern here?" Fields pressed her eyes locked on his. He nodded slowly, his head hanging in defeat. He had tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a coincidence, but now the truth was undeniable. It was as if the racist undertones of his actions had been there all along, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to surface. And Washington, he was the catalyst. "You can't hide behind excuses anymore," Fields continued, her voice softening slightly. "The department has already started digging into your history. They're calling for accountability. And the worst part is, this isn't just going away. This is bigger than you think." Just as Caldwell opened his mouth to respond, the door to the office opened. Laura glanced up and saw a uniformed officer standing in the doorway holding a folder. He handed it to Fields, who opened it without a word. Caldwell's stomach dropped as he saw her face darken with every page she flipped through. "This is bad," she muttered under her breath. She looked up at Caldwell. "They've started the investigation on you. It's official now." Before Caldwell could respond, she held up a piece of paper. "This," she said, her tone cold, "is the tip of the iceberg." It was a record of all the stops Caldwell had made over the last year, meticulously compiled, and the pattern was glaring. His stops were overwhelmingly directed at black men, nearly 80%, and almost none of them resulted in citations. But more than that, it became painfully obvious that most of the people he let go were white. Caldwell sat back in his chair, feeling the blood drain from his face. "Caldwell," Fields said, her voice low, "this is not just about you anymore. The community is looking at this, and they're angry. This is about a system that has failed the very people you swore to protect." The door swung open again, and a tall officer stepped into the room. It was Detective Jonathan Ward, a former Twins teammate of Caldwell from his academy days. He was now a part of the internal affairs team. He had heard the whispers, and now, as the case unfolded, he couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. He glanced at Caldwell and nodded grimly. "They're calling it a racist pattern of behavior," he said, his voice stiff. "The higher-ups want an explanation, and they're not giving you much time." Caldwell felt his heart race. This was no longer about a single bad decision. It was about everything he had done in the past, the countless stops, the pattern of ignoring the rights of black men. The community was rising up, demanding answers, and the department couldn't protect him much longer. "I never meant to hurt anyone," Caldwell whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't see it, not like this. I didn't think." Fields leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "You need to make a choice now. Either you come clean and face the consequences, or you dig in your heels and hope it blows over. But don't think for 1 second that it's going to blow over. People are watching. Are you feeling the pressure yet? This story isn't slowing down. It's just getting started. The truth always comes out no matter how hard you try to bury it. If you're still with us, don't forget to subscribe. Things are about to get real messy, and you'll want to see how it all unfolds." The walls were closing in on Caldwell, and he knew deep down that there was no escaping the storm that was about to hit. As the days dragged on, Caldwell found himself living in the shadow of his own mistakes. His apartment, once a place of refuge, now felt like a prison. Every time he picked up his phone, he was bombarded with notifications, news outlets covering the story, social media posts from strangers accusing him of being racist, and the growing uproar from civil rights groups demanding accountability. The weight of it all crushed him, making every breath feel heavier than the last. It wasn't just the department that had turned its back on him. The city of Jackson was angry. The community was angry. The video of Washington's arrest had gone viral, spreading like wildfire across the country. People were demanding answers, and the police force was scrambling to mitigate the damage. Caldwell was the face of everything that was wrong with the broken system. A system that had allowed racist behaviors to go unchecked for too long. But the real blow came when Washington made a public statement. Standing at a podium surrounded by reporters, his calm, measured voice echoed through the airwaves. "I don't want an apology," Washington said. "I don't want a settlement. I want real change. What happened to me is not just an isolated incident. It's part of a larger problem that has existed for far too long. A problem where power goes unchecked and where racist behavior is allowed to fester in the shadows." His words hit Caldwell like a ton of bricks. He had been so focused on his own ego, on maintaining control, that he had failed to see the bigger picture. Washington wasn't just a victim in this situation. He was a symbol of everything that needed to change. As Caldwell sat in his apartment watching the news coverage of Washington's speech, he realized that his life was forever altered. The badge he had worn for so long, the shield of authority he had always relied on, meant nothing now. It was just a symbol of a broken system, a system that had failed him and the very people it was meant to protect. The department, under immense pressure, had no choice but to act. Caldwell was officially suspended, pending a full investigation. He had no idea what the outcome would be, but he knew one thing. His career as a police officer was over. The next day, as he sat in a meeting with his lawyer, the weight of the situation finally hit him. The department had offered him a deal: resign quietly. No charges, no trial. Just walk away and the story would fade. But Caldwell knew that wasn't enough. He had to face the consequences. He couldn't just walk away. "I won't take the deal," Caldwell said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "I have to face what I've done." His lawyer looked at him, a mixture of surprise and concern on her face. "Are you sure this will ruin you? You're better off walking away." Caldwell shook his head. "I'm not running anymore. It's time to face the music." That night, the Jackson Tribune published an article that would seal his fate. Officer Caldwell resigns amidst growing controversy over racist arrest. It was the end of his career, but it was also the beginning of something larger. A movement sparked by Washington's courage to speak out as Caldwell walked out of his apartment for the last time. The weight of his decision settled in. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he had to change. He had to find a way to atone for the mistakes he had made. The story of Caldwell and Washington became a symbol for the need for change. Washington went on to work with civil rights groups pushing for police reform and greater accountability. And Caldwell, he had to live with the knowledge that his actions had done irreparable harm not just to Washington, but to the entire community he had sworn to protect. But there was one thing Caldwell could hold on to. He had finally seen the truth. He had finally realized that power, unchecked and unexamined, could destroy everything. And that was the lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. This is the end of the story of Officer Caldwell, a man who thought he was untouchable until the system finally held him accountable. The story of Charles Washington, a man who stood up for what was right, changed everything. But the question remains, how many others will have the courage to stand up and demand justice? If you're still here and want to see more stories of accountability and change, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This is a story that will continue to inspire conversations about racism, power, and the fight for justice. Don't miss out on the next chapter.